Hi, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for joining our March Health Equity Speaker Series event. We are so glad to have you here with us today. We'll give everyone about 5 more minutes or so to join. But in the meantime, please feel free to drop in the chat where you are today, something you hope to learn today. And as always, we try to make GlobeMed events as accessible as possible. And to do this, we'll read any visual content aloud. We'll do our best to uplift and read out any thoughts that are put into the chat, and then also warn you whenever we're about to start music. That way you can lower down your volume if necessary. Also, we have a live transcript available in English, which you can access at the bottom using the toolbar. And feel free to participate in any way you feel comfortable throughout the event, with video on or off, or using the chat and reactions as you please. If you need any technical support, India will be our tech person today. She should have tech by her name, and she does. And yeah, we'll give people about 5 more minutes, and then we'll get started. All right, everyone, I just want to say thank you again for joining us today. Today is our latest installment of our Health Equity Speaker Series. These monthly events are where we turn to the experts in global health equity movement, particularly the leaders for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and for marginalized communities, as their expertise and contributions are most often systemically overlooked. As an organization, GlobeMed aims to mobilize a community of students and grassroots leaders to improve the health of people around the world. GloMed students learn about health equity leadership directly from our experts, our grassroots partners in Asia, Africa, and the Americas, and become part of a movement for global health equity. We also believe in the power of the community behind this movement, which is why we make these programs available to everyone. We'll drop a donation link in the chat below if you'd like to invest in this programming and help support us moving forward. Again, I don't know if I introduced myself yet, but I'm about to. My name is Jonathan. I use pronouns he, him, and I serve as GloMed's program coordinator. I'm also an alum of the GloMed at UT Austin chapter, and I'll be co-moderating today's program with Shivani, and I'll let her introduce herself now.
Hi everyone, my name is Shivani Chawla and I use she, her pronouns. I am a current student and member of GloMed at UC, at the University of Cincinnati. I am also a member of GloMed's Student Advisory Board and a volunteer with Girls Rock Cincinnati. I'm introducing today's speaker, Raneem. Raneem uses he, they pronouns and is a youth arts administrator, performer, creator, and founder of Girls Rock Cincinnati. He is committed to collective healing and equity through creative placemaking. If you have any questions moving forward, please pop it in the chat or DM it to India, or wait until the end. We'll have some time for an audience question and answer.
Thank you, Shivani. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here today. I feel very honored to be chatting with you all today. Just some housekeeping notes while I am presenting. So I'll be sharing my screen. We'll have a little PowerPoint. I'll be reading everything off of the screen for accessibility and then be talking throughout it to get some more details. While I'm sharing screen, it's a little difficult to see the chat. So Shivani or India, if you see anything in the chat, I welcome questions throughout. It'll be a pretty casual conversation just to get to know you all and share this experience with you. So if there are any questions in the chat, if someone could let me know, that'd be great. Or you can raise a hand on your screen. Let's see, I think that was all my housekeeping today. And as far as participation, I really encourage you to participate to the fullest extent. I know that Zoom is wonderful for giving us the opportunity to access more things that we can't show up to in person for various reasons. But I do find that it's helpful to keep your camera on if it's something you feel comfortable doing so. And if you feel uncomfortable doing so, I would ask yourself just one more question to see if it would be something you're willing to do today. Just so that we can all make that face-to-face connection and be integrated with each other. So first, I would like to begin, before we get into the presentation, of just asking, when you hear the phrase safer spaces, what comes to mind? I'm just curious where we're all starting at with that concept, and what you hope to learn today. And if you don't know anything about safer spaces, there are no wrong definitions, but you can go ahead and pop it in the chat or unmute yourself. But I'm curious to hear from everyone what their understanding of this concept is. And it's okay if you've never heard about it before. I'll give us just another minute if anyone would like to be brave, and then we can move on. Shivani, can I put you on the spot and ask for a definition?
When I think of the word safer spaces, I think of it could be like a virtual or a physical space in which I think people, like I speak for myself, where I feel like I am supported in and not judged for the things that I say, because I'm still learning.
That is excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and just adding off of that, just a space where you feel comfortable coming as your full self and authentic self, and like Shivani said, not feeling like you're going to be judged for doing so. I think also is like me kind of growing on Shivani's definition.
That is an excellent point as well. So I'll put out the reminder that we are always learning and growing together. I am committed to meeting everyone where they are, and we should all do the same. So whatever stage you are at in your learning or unlearning process is where we'll be. And so throughout this presentation, there are no wrong answers. There are no, don't feel like you should already know these things, because that's what we're here to do, right? Okay, without further ado, I will go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Okay, can everyone see that all right?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so today we are talking about the power of access and creating safer spaces. Let me see if I can put this into full screen mode. Okay. So, about me, my name is Raneem. I am a performing artist. Ooh, my camera. Okay. I'm a performing artist, curator. I like to consider myself an energy amplifier. I like bringing people together. I'm a youth arts administrator, a community organizer. Some of the identities that I hold dear to me are being trans, being Arab, being queer. I'm a dog dad, as you can see. And I am also the co-founder and co-director of Girls Rock Cincinnati. So, Girls Rock Cincinnati is a music and creative arts camp for girls and gender-expansive youth ages 12 to 18 in Greater Cincinnati. We believe in a new creative landscape with no barriers to ample and equitable opportunities. We are a week-long day camp. Currently, that's the core of our programming, where campers of those identities will come and learn an instrument. They'll participate in workshops of varying disciplines. They'll get to see performances from local musicians. There's a final performance at the end of it where they get to show off the songs that they've written and the art that they've done throughout the week to our community. Yes.
Do you, we can see, I think there's like a pop-up for your notes blocking the pictures.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Alrighty, just 1 second. Let me stop share and restart that. Thank you. Okay, I'm not sure why it did that. Okay, is that better?
Yes, great, thank you.
Cool, thanks. I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and show you the picture from before if you didn't get to see it. Okay. Like I was saying, the core of our programming is a week-long day camp where we teach music and art, but it's much more than that. So our values behind it are punk/DIY, which means do-it-yourself ethos. We believe that music is a vehicle for social change and a tool for rebellion and resistance. We believe in abundance mentality, which is generational knowledge building through mentorship and freely sharing ideas without incentives. We believe in equity and community, building a just and cared for community by fostering friendships and artistic connections with a focus on equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We believe in empowerment. We believe that every young person is their own best advocate, and we uplift their voices. We foster growth through building a safe space, for building safer spaces for them to take risks, be wrong, and be brave in trying new things. So what we hope to do with our programming is not just teaching our campers about music and about arts and how to do those skills, but about giving them an example of a space where they can really internalize and activate the concept of being their own best advocate. What we want them to take away from the experience is, number one, knowing that safer spaces for them exist based on their specific identities, based on their interests, We want them to be able to move through life knowing that there will be people that want to support them, that want to share knowledge with them, that want to grow alongside them and learn from them. And we want them to take away the empowerment and the knowledge that the things that they want to see possible in the world are possible at their hands, regardless of access to resources, regardless of the support that they have from others. They have it within themselves, and to give them an example of how to do that in their own communities. So I'll talk a little bit about abundance mentality and how it ties into mutual aid. A quote that I love is, "Small is good, small is all, the large is a reflection of the small." And that's from author Adrienne Marie Brown from her book Emergent Strategies. And one of our core beliefs, and one of my beliefs about Girls Rock and why I started it, is the revolution is full of joy. When we picture resistance, rebellion, revolution, and dismantling systems of oppression to better our world and our communities, I feel like a lot of the imagery that comes up is protests, feet on the ground, mass movements, gathering as many people together as possible. But it's not always sustainable. And addressing a crisis, there are crises all over the place, right? It feels like the world is crumbling around us. It feels like dismantling systems of oppression is something we'll never be able to achieve in this lifetime. But I think it's less about achievement and more about the micro interactions that we're able to impact every day. And so that's what we try to do. And within the abundance mentality, I believe that we enact mutual aid. We enact taking care of each other through small movements, just by giving a single camper a guitar and somebody who cares about them enough to teach them and sit with them and hear them out, is a tool for revolution. I also think about the analogy and the imagery that folks will throw around specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement, where, you know, when folks say all lives matter, for instance, you're going to say, well, if my house is on fire and my neighbor's house is not, who's the one that's going to get the firefighters' attention, right? But if all the houses are on fire, what are we supposed to do? And so it's less about putting out the fires for me and more about the preventative care and just taking care of each other in micro interactions. And the ways that that impacts our communities, our health, our bodies, our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health are really big. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But that's kind of the core of our programming. And I will go back for just 1 second and talk about how and why we got started. So I realized I skipped over that point. Girls Rock is actually an international movement. It began in Portland in the early 2000s. The first camp was started there. And today, almost a little bit over 20 years later, there are over 100 or 200 camps all across the world. We are affiliated with some of the camps. We're not an official member of the Girls Rock National Alliance, but we hope to be soon. But related to the abundance mentality, our camp was grown through all of the resources compiled by all these different Girls Rock camps across the world and across the country. So I began it in 2018. I reached out to a couple friends after I had an experience volunteering at Girls Rock Columbus and seeing what it was all about. And it was just so transformative for me that I knew that I had to start it in Cincinnati because I've never seen anything like it here. And I just kept coming back to the question of how different would my life be had I had this as a young person. And I find that everyone who has come through our camp as adults, through volunteer work, have expressed the same sentiment, and particularly for queer and trans people to feel represented. a lot of the feelings that that brought up for me of why I started it was just feeling extremely unsafe, unwelcomed, and unsupported in the things that I wanted to do, which was be a performer, be involved in music, play in bands, get booked at venues. As we know, in the hierarchy of oppression, white cis men kind of got it all, right? And for the rest of us, it's a little bit harder. And I'll leave it at that. I won't get my blood pressure up today, but it becomes extraordinarily difficult to have your needs met and have your desires achieved when you belong to marginalized identity groups. And so I just kept thinking, how different would my life be had I had this as a young person? And the answer is very, very, very different. I think I'm going to pause there and keep on moving, and we'll come back to some thoughts on the impact on individuals' lives by having affirmed affinity spaces and safer spaces. So I'll go through this slide and then pause for questions or comments. So the core of safer spaces, also that's Shivani. The core of safer spaces is not just a list of do's and don'ts in a physical space. It's a commitment to caring for one another in ways that honor each other's lived and varied experiences. It is crucial that we build these spaces for young people as early as possible so they may move through the world knowing that it is possible. And we're going to go into an activity, but for now, does anybody have questions or comments? And feel free to just unmute if you do, and I'll give it another second and move forward if not. Okay. So we're going to do a little activity. You can put this in your phone notes. You can write it down on a piece of paper. You can just think about it in your head. But I want you to take about 2 minutes and think about what makes you feel safe. This can be physical things. These can be abstract things. It can be a color. It can be a person. It could be a place. It could be a thing. But take a moment and think about what makes you feel safe. And then we're going to come back and share these as a group. We're going to go around. So we'll give it about 2 minutes. Okay, we'll give it about 30 more seconds. Okay, let us wrap up our final thoughts, and then I'm going to encourage everybody to share at least one thing. You can pop it in the chat, you can unmute yourself. But I can go ahead and share to start. So some of the things that make me feel safe are having other people of color in the room, being at home, being with my dog. If I'm in a new space, I like knowing where the exits are. It makes me feel safe when people take my accessibility needs into consideration when inviting me places. Pink and purple make me feel safe. Cozy things, weighted blankets. Yes. So would anybody else like to share?
I can share next. When I think of a situation that I feel safe in, when my friends and I make dinner together and we're catching up and cooking, and I think the act of being with the people that I love and talking about their lives and mine and making a meal together is a very safe feeling.
I love that. Bryn just shared in the chat, so I will read that out loud, if that is okay. Music, when others feel safe, being around people with similar stories to mine, I like that, and a good book. Priya also said being at home, being with friends and family, and laughter, and feeling safe in spaces full of joy and laughter. Okay, would anyone else like to share?
I can share. I think to echo what has come up a couple times is that feeling of being at home, feeling that warmth. Raneem, I agree with you, having that blanket. I'm actually wrapped up in a blanket now. It is raining where I am. So that makes me feel safe. Also, being around family does, and feelings of feeling love from others, feeling appreciated, and feeling accepted.
I always love hearing people's answers to these. Would anyone else like to share? Okay, we've got a response in the chat. When my friends are interested or supportive in what I do, and feeling safe when I know that I won't be judged wrongly if I do something. So, oh yeah, Jonathan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I echo a lot of what people said, but one thing is like going to a new space and finding that one thing that feels familiar always makes me feel a little bit safer whenever I'm in new spaces around new people.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I appreciate you all being vulnerable with me today. So the primary purpose of this exercise is to get you thinking about, in very clear terms, what makes you feel safe. And another aspect of it is recognizing that everybody's needs are kind of the same. There are very particular things that make certain people feel safer than others. But recognizing that across generations, across cultures, across identities, the things that make us feel safe make others too. And so something I want you to think about, when you think of these things that make you feel safe, where do you feel it in your body? For me, my cheeks get warm when I'm around the people I love. Who is around you? Are you in public? Do you feel comfortable at a coffee shop with strangers? Do you feel more comfortable at the one in your neighborhood where you get to wave hi to the person whose name you don't know but you see every day for the last 5 years? What are the things that you're doing? How is your body moving? And the takeaway from that exercise, and I would encourage you all to write this down and do some journaling about it later, as how do you seek out and replicate those feelings and those spaces? And that's kind of what we're aiming to do together, and that's what we aim to do with Girls Rock as well, is recognizing where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, and what makes you feel safe, and how do you offer that to yourself time and time again, and how do you create that space for others to feel the same. That is what community care is about. That is what mutual aid is about. That is what the micro interactions of supporting each other is. Recognizing the humanity in each other across our varied identities, and working to create a better and safer place for all of us. And that's something that we try to teach at Girls Rock. And that leads into honoring our needs. We believe that every young person is their own best advocate, and we enforce these beliefs by allowing them to learn, teach, and grow alongside us in an intergenerational community. Especially for young people of marginalized identities, especially for young people in the arts of gender-oppressed identities, we must carve space for them in the world to take over. And that brings us to the health impacts of representation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience within growing up as a socially feminine person, or being socialized as a woman growing up, and my experience in Cincinnati in the music scene, and kind of in music across the country, and my experience with that. But it's important to note first that science, medicine, and healthcare are not isolated absolute truths. Instead, healthcare and medicine is an important slice of our cultural pie. It impacts and is informed by the culture around us. So when I was getting prepared to give this presentation, I thought to myself, like, oh, I have to do all this clinical research and get this data and get like these statistics on why it's so important for trans people to be represented and what the suicide statistics are for young trans people in the country, and compile all this information about all the laws that are happening against trans rights right now and why it's so important to do these things. And then I reminded myself, I am not a researcher. I am not a clinician. I am not in the medical field, and I can only speak to my own experience, so that's what I'm going to do. But my experience growing up, I started getting involved in music when I was 16. And every time I would walk into, first of all, if I could even get into a venue, I would send out cold call emails. I would try to talk to people at the box office where I was going. I would try to hand out my CDs. Even just recording music, just so many barriers getting in the way of that, nobody taking me seriously. I was a 15-year-old writing music on a ukulele, and nobody wanted anything to do with me. And even getting access to learning music. I just so happened to be in a school district where music funding had not been cut yet. And so I was able to take choir. My family wasn't able to afford music lessons outside of that, but I was able to get it through school. And that's kind of where I got started. But even before that, we think about who gets access to learning things. Music is expensive to participate in. People can be naturally skilled. They can grow up with all the talent in the world, but having access to hone those skills, to practice them, to learn from others, to get expertise, to be presented on stage, to have your music promoted, to be able to sell it, to deal with the guy at the CD printing shop who thinks that your stuff is dumb and doesn't take you seriously. It's a wild ride. And I just kept running into it time and time and time again, where being in those spaces made me feel physically terrible, emotionally terrible. It was mentally taxing because I was made at every corner to feel like I did not belong there. And And then I got to college and I went to Miami University. I initially went for vocal performance and music education, but quickly realized that that felt a little too narrow for me. I didn't want to be like a K through 12 music educator. I wanted to do more than that. And so I ended up graduating with a degree in professional writing, just because I like writing and speaking and communicating. I think I'm pretty good at it. And but afterwards, I kept finding myself coming back time and time again to music and to curating and creating spaces for youth and arts. But during my time at Miami, I had a house and thought to myself, well, I hate every venue that I have ever been to by performing at. I have never felt comfortable in one of those spaces. I've never felt comfortable with the people who attend. I have never felt comfortable with the quote unquote boys club that it felt like. And just getting looks, not overtly hateful, but unwelcoming vibes from the people I tried to interact with. And so I thought to myself, well, I have a physical space. Let me try to do something with it. And so throughout my couple years being on campus, I booked probably over 150 shows that the lineups and the audience and the missions behind them were primarily focused on BIPOC and primarily focused on people of gender oppressed identities. And when I say gender oppressed, I mean those who are not cis men, basically. Anyone who experiences gender discrimination, I should say. And that proved to be remarkably rewarding because, again, it was the first time that I had physically ever been in a space where I felt like those identities were valued and where I felt safe. And I was able to kind of recreate that outside of school within Girls Rock. And so our dream is to have a physical space that is an all ages venue, that is a sober venue, where our youth can book their own shows, because that is a big reason why I feel like my life would be extraordinarily different had I had that as a young person. And then we think about the impacts of representation and how it ties into the physical health and wellness of our bodies. So I feel like when the word representation gets thrown around, it's typically, excuse me, sorry. Could I get a time check from someone?
Yes, it's 1:39 EST.
Perfect. Okay. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. So we think about the health impacts and representation. And when we hear the word representation, I feel like it's thrown around a lot when people say media representation. And I can remember clearly the first time I saw a queer person on a mainstream, channel show. I clearly remember the first time in my little suburb in Ohio that I saw a visibly queer person on the street. I vividly remember the first time seeing a trans person on mainstream TV, and that was not that long ago. I'm not going to teach on the history of gender and sexuality oppression in the United States. I can recommend a few resources for that, but I can speak to my own experience of had I had access to seeing people who looked like me in mainstream spaces, I would have transitioned years ago. I would have had an easier time coming out to my family. I'm a child of Jordanian immigrants, and there just isn't any representation or resources for people to learn more. And healthcare, I feel like, science with a capital S and medicine with a capital M, I feel like are portrayed as these absolute truths. Like it is clinically researched, and therefore there is no room for error. It is a truth that that is devoid of human error or human influence. That I am sure, as you all know, that is just not true. Our healthcare system and medicine in general, especially in the United States, informs and is informed by our cultural makeup. And so when we lack representation of trans people and queer people and people of color across broadly sweeping institutions, if they're not taught about in school, if you don't have trans teachers because they're not employed, because it's still legal in 48 states to deny employment to someone based on gender or sexuality, when you are 16 and trying to learn how to play the guitar and you don't see anyone who plays the guitar, you're not going to pick it up. And when it applies to healthcare and medicine and accessing healthcare, if the general population, which includes our doctors, which includes our lawmakers, which includes our physicians, and the physician assistants who are giving me looks when I'm walking into the surgery consult to get top surgery, when they are not informed or interact with queer and trans people on a day-to-day basis, nothing really shifts. We default back to what we consider to be the norm. And without representation, nothing will shift. And so by giving our young people an opportunity to interact with, learn from, teach, and look up to people who look like them, people who grew up in the same neighborhoods, people who share their gender identity, their sexual identity, we give them examples that their identities are possible to move through the world with. Going back to our exercise on what makes you feel safe, I would really encourage you to think about in which spaces do you feel like your body is moving through body temperature water? In which spaces do you feel like your body is moving through hot water, where your body is moving through cold water, where your body is moving and trying to step across a river that is rushing and there are sharp rocks under your feet? And I say that to mean, in which spaces do you physically embody safety and acceptance? For me personally, when I'm at home and I'm alone, I'm not thinking about my body and my existence in the ways I move through the world. When I am out in public at trying to go to a Kroger in rural Ohio, looking the way that I do, with my visibly queer and trans partner looking the way that he does, holding hands, just trying to shop for cereal while we're at a cabin in Northeast Ohio, that makes me keenly aware of the way that my body moves through the world. And the psychosomatic effects of having your adrenal glands be assaulted every day, every moment of the day, by trying to stress about and think about the ways that you move through the world. What are the ways that we can make that easier on people? When we think about our privileges, I like to think a lot about what is afforded to me and what am I willing to give up. And so if you're answering the question of what spaces do I not have to notice the way my body moves through the world, I encourage you to think a little bit harder about why you're afforded that privilege and who isn't. And it is inseparable from race, from class, from gender. We can imagine these worlds of utopias where we don't see color, where everybody has all the resources that they need, where everyone can afford to be fed, to be nourished, to be housed, to be clothed, to experience joy, to have all of their hobbies enriched. I would love to have a studio with 20 grand worth of equipment in it. Excuse me. But that's just not the case. And I think about, even with my multitude of marginalized identities, I still move through spaces much easier than some of my counterparts who experience more colorism, who experience discrimination based on not having English as a first language. I encourage you to think about how much harder your life would be if English was not your first language and you have to call your bank back to get your card not deactivated because it found a suspicious. Just all of the little interactions that you have to move through the world with. Think about the effects it has on your body and the effects that it may have on others. And so when we talk about representation, what I'm really talking about is, do I feel seen, and do I feel heard, and do I feel reflected? When I look around me, do I see people that look like me? Do I see people that talk and act like me? Do I see people that share my lived experiences? And if you're in a space where you don't feel that way, I would ask yourself why, and who is being denied the invitation there, especially when you're talking about higher education, especially when you're talking about medicine and who gets access to the healthcare that they need. And so it's crucial, it's all inseparable to think about race and class and gender dynamics and all of the systems of oppression that we live under. And all that we can do is create safer spaces between one another, and small acts of mutual aid and small olive branches to our neighbors, and and particularly to craft those spaces for youth so that we may hand it off to them so they can do better than we did. A quote that I will end on before we wrap up for Q&A is, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On quiet nights, I can hear her breathing. And that is from Arundhati Roy. So,
Thank you so much, Raneem.
Yeah, of course.
We're going to go ahead and start a bit of our Q&A, and I think there's one in the chat from Priya where she says, I love the way you describe building these safer spaces as community care. How have you seen safer spaces shift, change, transform as new people join the community? And how do you facilitate that change?
That's a great question. Let me reread it and think about it for a moment. So I think the ways that, just for context, I'll be 27 next month. So I've been involved in community organizing and basically involved in the community since I have had a car to be able to do so, or my own transportation, which has been roughly about a decade. So in my time of interacting with community spaces and communities in general, this didn't really exist as a concept. I mean, affinity groups have always existed, right? And as a necessity, as the only place that people could feel safe within. Affinity groups, as in like a group specifically for Black women, a group specifically for trans people, groups specifically for women in general. I feel like those have been the most common. And the ways that I've seen it shift and change and transform, number one, we're talking about it more, right? And number two, specifically within the queer and trans community, I think a large amount of discourse is around the concept of women in femme-only spaces. I'll touch on that briefly. I won't get too ahead of myself. And the thought of, do people's socialized genders actually make us feel more like who do we surround ourselves with that is actually making a safer space? And the ways that I've seen that shift has been less about the shared identities and affinity groups that people gather with, and more about just the concept of micro interactions and mutual aid and change that way. And so it's less about, to sum it up, I'll use the phrase that's widely known, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And so just because you share an identity with someone doesn't mean that they have your best interests in mind or that you're automatically going to create a safer space together. It can, but I think shifting towards embodying the concepts of safer spaces versus seeking the particular people, and also embodying the what versus the who. And so what I mean by that is focusing on a shared mission and not exactly on bringing people of a certain identity together, which is kind of what we do still. So I may be contradicting myself a little bit, but facilitating the change of getting people to join in these communities and to craft safer spaces on their own. You kind of just do it by example, right? And so asking your neighbors, asking your friends, asking your classmates, asking your coworkers, what makes you feel safe and how can I facilitate that? And actually following through with that. And so we do this training for campers, and we give them all these definitions, and we give them all this rhetoric, and we give them the whole spiel. And then we try to enact it and encourage them to do the same in their own communities. I hope that answered your question. I feel like I went off on a tangent. I feel like we may have time for maybe another question or two, Shivani. Is that right?
Yep. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to DM India or I, or just put it in the chat.
I'd also, for my own affirmation, if there's any takeaways that you got from this presentation, I would love to hear what those are.
I'll share my own affirmation. I think whenever I hear you speak, I think just a little bit more deeply about the way I interact with others, and just being able to honor the humanity and make sure that in the smallest of interactions, like making sure if I'm going to go to a study room, inviting a friend or seeing if anyone wants to join. I just think that when I hear about the ways that I can be more inclusive, or just, like you said, honor the humanity in others. And I think that really resonates with me.
Thank you. I will also say, on a brief note, something to think about and chew on when we talk about creating safer spaces and these concepts of communities. I believe that the quickest way to dividing our communities and dismantling our cause is focusing strictly on like your identities as the lens with which you view the world. So I would encourage you to think about, what does it mean to hold your identities lightly, and think more about how your body moves through the world and how you are pulling others alongside with you. I think that it can become very divisive when we grasp onto an identity group as to champion the cause for a specific identity. So for instance, if I were to say I am a trans person and therefore everything that I do has to be in alignment with trans rights. But I think the reality of it is that I am a trans person, and therefore everything that I do is in alignment with trans rights. And I'm also a person who holds multiple other identities. That's just the point I wanted to make that we didn't have time for.
Thank you so much, Raneem. I'm going to pass it back to Jonathan.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you both for doing this and for everybody that joined us. I know I learned so much, and now I have a lot of self-reflection that I'm going to be doing moving forward, and just seeing how I move through different spaces and what I can do to better invite others to move through those spaces with me. So I just want to say thank you again for everyone that joined and took the time to come out today. And I hope you enjoyed hearing from Raneem and Shivani. They both did great. And yeah, it's just a little plug. We do this every month. GlobeMed does the Health Equity Speaker Series monthly event, and you can find all of our GlobeMed upcoming programs on our community programming page with India. We'll put into the chat, which will also link. Then again, if you would like to invest in our ability to continue programs like this, we'll also drop the donation link in the chat as well. And yeah, I just hope to see y'all again in future programmings. Hope y'all have a good rest of y'all's day.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.